Welcome, friends, to the Mineral Exploration Academy special series on current affairs. Today, we'll be discussing the status of Indian mining industry from the perspective of the industry players. The mining industry in our country has been showing a consistent declining trend. Strategic strength of a country depends on a strong industrial base, and minerals are the raw materials for most of the manufacturing industry. In India, mineral industry has been consistently posting a negative growth rate, and therefore the manufacturing is getting consistently import dependent. We have no strategic stockpiles, at least not that I know of critical minerals. The coronavirus pandemic which has disturbed the global supply lines, has significantly exposed our import dependence and specifically China dependence of our manufacturing industry. Private mineral exploration industry is totally dead and stands effectively nationalized. So the pipeline of new mines of the future is totally dry. Today we'll analyze what are the reasons for such poor performance. Why the exploration has especially high value and base metal exploration is totally dead. Are our laws to blame, or implementation of the laws are not getting to the desired results? Today we'll discuss all these issues with our guest, Mr. Sandeep Lakhwara. Mr. Sandeep Lakhwara is the CEO of India's only public listed mineral exploration company, Deccan Gold Mines Limited. Very successfully, they have made many discoveries. Welcome, Sandeep. Let's start by expressing just a general concept. Normally, government makes mining laws and exploration industries to keep them stable over a very long time. Essentially, mining projects are like 20 to 50 years duration. But we see very frequent changes to the law in India, especially in the last 10-15 years. Now, the stated government policy intentions are often aimed at enhancing exploration, increasing domestic production, encouraging exports. Now, do you think the Mining Act that has come into effect since 2015 has delivered that as the intended in its vision statement?
Absolutely not. That is the best way of putting it. We have been exploring, as you're well aware, for close to 17 years in India. That is the time that Deccan Gold Mines has been operating in this country. We have made multiple discoveries, but particularly since 2015, when the laws were amended, uh, uh, they offered some rights to protect us as a result of these amendments, and the rights were there in the prior laws prior to 2015. But somehow, midway in 2017 or thereabouts, I think there was a change of mindset where none of these applications that gave us the rights to take it to a mining license stage were getting processed. And the whole idea with those laws was that particular Section 10A2B that got introduced in 2015 was that it would protect our rights to take it to a mining license stage so that we can actually go out and develop mines, get into gold production, something that this country needs, as a matter of priority, because we are importing tons and tons of gold, close to 900 tons of gold every year, costing billions of dollars in foreign exchange, creating the current account deficit, which can be so easily avoided by, fast tracking the grant of these licenses, which is something that the government promised, which is why we made the investment in the first place. But no, that has simply not happened. And the likelihood of it happening in the near future, there is nothing for us to be too excited about, in that respect.
And what part of the current jurisdictions do you think the industry would have problems with?
Again, lots. I mean, I'll talk specifically from a gold industry or a precious metal perspective. See, the biggest problem is, the laws, if they were followed, would be fine. The problem is that there is different interpretation of the laws by different authorities. There is frequent changes within what was propagated 2 years ago to what is being propagated now. There are continuous reviews of the laws as the file progresses. So something that you take for granted when you make an investment based on the laws as they existed at that time no longer become relevant, 2 years from that date or 4 years from that date. And I could give you many, many classic examples of that. And one that comes to mind immediately is, the Karnataka government introduced something that is called a checklist. Now, the checklist was introduced about 4 or 5 years ago, and every file, irrespective of the stage of its processing, was re-subjected to the checklist. It took another 3-4 years, caused another 3 to 4 years of delay in processing the same file. So, and even within the departments, when you talk to different, bureaucrats, they have a completely different mindset in terms of how it should be processed. And the reason is very simple. Mining laws are very complicated. You can't pluck a person from agricultural department and make him head of the mines department because he has no background to assess what the mining industry needs, what are the current laws, what is the best way to implement them. Yes, he has a team around him, but the team simply bows down to what he wants. So if he doesn't want to process something, the team will find reasons within the law not to process it. So it really is a mess. What they need is to see, overhauling the laws is fine. But more than that, it is the implementation which is the issue. And unless that implementation is improved, I do not see brighter future in terms of bringing foreign direct investment into the country, developing mines that are ready to go into production, reducing foreign exchange, reducing our current account deficit. It's not going to happen. Creating employment.
So essentially what you are telling that when it moves from intention to policy, policy to law, law to regulations, regulation to implementation, there's a bit of distortion in the and then it does not achieve. Can you give me some specific examples on that happening?
I can give you lots. I'll just refer to some of our cases, for example. In our case, we have a mining license application over a deposit in Bigaranjur village, which is the Haveri district, about 500 odd kilometers away from Bangalore. Now, we discovered gold in that prospect. We applied for a mining license application back in 2009. Today, we're talking 2020, and 11 years later, that particular file was earlier approved by the state government of Karnataka, sent to the Ministry of Mines, did their due diligence in terms of compliance with the law, and ultimately approved that license in 2015 with a direction to the state government to go ahead and exit. 2015, as we just discussed, the laws changed. They then decided to subject that application again to another checklist. This is after the state government had approved it, sent it to Delhi. Delhi approved it, brought it back to the state government. Then they are going through another checklist with the same department, just going around in circles. Nothing. And, now they are talking of deleting Section 10A2B, which is the section that protects our right. Now, that is all that will do is create greater angst and more litigation. There is enough litigation within the mining circles already because of the frequent flip-flop of decisions, of processing, of not following the regulations, changing the... So that is one classic example, that 11 years later, a file that was approved in 2009 is awaiting a final execution in 2020. And we are still not certain. And that's only one. We have several projects in the Hatti belt that have gone through a similar fate. The reconnaissance permits were approved. We applied for the prospecting licenses. They never got approved. We went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court directed the state government to process the files under Section 10A2B, and that was about 3 years ago now. 3 years later, the files have not moved, and they're still sitting with the Department of Mines and Geology in Karnataka awaiting processing. This is despite a Supreme Court order. So now we are forced to go back to the Supreme Court and get another ruling on and a time limit within which these files are going to be processed. So, the laws are really, not even so much the laws, the implementation of those laws is almost non-existent.
That's a very sorry state of affairs. So essentially, okay. So you said this Ganajur discovery. If it's not a business secret, would you be able to tell our viewers essentially how much time it took for you to make the discovery, how much investment went into the discovery, and since then, how long have you been waiting to get it clearance to develop into a mine?
All right, let's start with the investment. The investment runs into tens of millions of dollars because exploration, particularly for gold is a deep-seated mineral in most cases, and exploration for gold is not the same as it is for other metals and minerals, which those in the know would understand. The time that we spent, and normally gold exploration takes easily from the time that you start to the time that you make a discovery of the deposit around 10 years. In our case, we started working in Ganajur in around 2004. We launched the mining application in 2006. So 2 years later, we were working under the reconnaissance permit. So since 2006 to 2020, which is 14 years, whilst we have been working partly under a prospecting license over that area, the mining license is still being awaited. So 14 years later, we are still awaiting the execution of the mining license so that we can take it to production. And having said that, in between, we have done all the feasibility studies that need to be done. We have submitted all the reports to the government that needed to be done. We have had several interactions with the Ministry of Mines in Delhi, with the state government in Karnataka, with the project monitoring group where this project is registered as a priority, the Prime Minister's office. All of these institutions have been approached, have had some input in terms of the processing of the file, but the bottom line is that we are still awaiting its final execution. And what happens is every time we get close, some new matter is raised by the authorities, despite a proper legal opinion having been obtained from the state government of Karnataka itself that the file is ready to be executed. They keep coming up with new issues every time it gets closer to getting executed.
So you essentially invested about $10 million, worked on it between 2 to 4 years. And how much gold did you discover there?
We have discovered about 318,000 ounces of gold. And it's not 2 to 4 years, Amit. We've started working in this area over the last 17 years, 2003, 2004. We have been on and off working. Of course, the last few years we have done nothing because we are awaiting the grant of the mining license. But earlier, we have done intensive exploration in this area. And the idea is that once a mining license gets granted, we will carry on exploring because that area also has multiple satellite sites which have potential for additional gold reserves. So it is a great discovery. It has great potential to get into a gold mine, but for the licensing regime that is preventing us from taking it into production.
So essentially this is about, let's say, in today's prices would be about $500 million worth of resources in ground that we have not explored.
Yeah, 318,000 multiplied by, yes, it would be, yes.
So slightly more than $500 million. So we have,
it would be more.
In a small village in Karnataka, we have $500 million worth of gold sitting inside the ground. And you have made the discovery, you have made the investment to discover that. And we have been waiting for 17 years to get a piece of paper from the government that permits you to take this gold outside the ground. And in that time, we have spent more than billions of dollars to import that gold from other countries.
Correct, absolutely correct. And the point is that if this got started, there would be a lot of interest in gold exploration and gold mining in India because the potential is tremendous. A lot of foreign investors, a lot of junior explorers internationally and from within India would be very keen to spend money on exploration, but they all need security of tenure. No one can wait 17 years as we have, and we're still waiting, to see the benefits of the work that we've done. In the meanwhile, we've also had to look after the farmers. We do a lot of CSR activities in that area. We have paid some government institutions 40% deposit for the land acquisition once the license is executed, but we are still waiting.
Since 2015, there has been a new development is that the government is now looking at an auction route to grant the mining licenses. What would this have effect on your business?
Auction route, I have no issues with in terms of certain minerals. Auction route, as far as gold is concerned, is problematic in my view because, as I said earlier, gold is a deep-seated mineral. It requires intensive exploration that stretches out anywhere up to 10 years. Only people that have spent the money on exploration is companies like ours, and they have spent the money based on receiving the final mining license grants or receiving the security of tenure that was promised them under that Section 10A2B. Now, those are not available and those should never be approached from an auction perspective. If the government is looking at auctioning, maybe they can look at auctioning certain areas where maybe the GSI has done some work But wherever there has been a private company that has spent money, invested money, time, energy, efforts, developing the project, that should not be arbitrarily and retrospectively taken away from them because that is grossly unfair and unjust, and then put it up for auction just so that the state government gets better revenues. No. So I totally disagree with auctioning of those sort of prospects that had protection under Section 10A2B. Anything outside of those prospects, fine, the government can take its own course.
The government creates a FT jurisdictional framework, and that leads to distortions in the industry. Now, instead of
Yes.
correcting the distortions, the government creates more legislation to try to solve the distortions by creating more jurisdiction, more rules,
Correct.
and that would lead to further, let's say, unintended consequences in form of more jurisdiction, more distortion.
Absolutely. And what are those consequences? What are those consequences going to be, Amit? That the whole thing is going to be tied up. Those particular blocks that earlier had protection under 10A2B are going to be tied up in litigation. Litigation will take years, a lot of money, a lot of energy. There is going to be no development in those blocks. Again, I'll give you a classic example. Apart from Ganaju Hatti. Now, we've made several preliminary discoveries in that Hatti belt. Those areas have been blocked for the last 10 years. We've been unable to approach it because it's all been in the courts. Neither the local villagers, nor the government, nor the area, nor the company has benefited because of laws that have not either been followed by the government in terms of implementation, and the matter is simply tied up in courts, and they're not, even when they get up, they're not implementing those orders, or it's taking them a long time to implement it. So the whole thing is going nowhere, unfortunately.
You just mentioned Rule 10A2B. So, how does this Rule 10A2B gives protection to the industry?
Sure. What that does is, what it says categorically is, if you spend money on developing a project and you received a right to develop that project through earlier a reconnaissance permit, then a prospecting license, you have a right to take it to the mining license stage, to receive a mining license, and then take it into production. So they call it a seamless transition from an RP to PL to ML. Having said that, if you make enough discovery of the resources in any of these three stages, then you can apply for a mining in any of the earlier two stages, like in either an RP or an ML. You can take it to the mining license stage, irrespective of what stage you are, but you need to be in a position to substantiate that that discovery that you've made of mineral resources is sufficient and suitable from a mining perspective. So that is what that 10A2B grants.
And so you said that is the government planning to remove this 10A2B? I saw a tweet from you is that if this is removed, this will harm the industry. So how do you get affected, and what signal does this give to the foreign investors?
Well, as far as foreign investors are concerned, I don't think it gives them any comfort whatsoever. They are going to shy away from the country, particularly if these laws are changed retrospectively, because, who wants to come in and invest in a country where you make an investment based on the laws as they exist when you make the investment, and 5 years later, you realize that those laws are no longer tenable. You've made the investment anyway, and under those laws, you have no rights. No one is going to come to this country on that basis. So it is going to directly impact companies like ours quite substantially. But having said that, I strongly believe in the justice system in the country, and I believe, and there are multiple judgments already in place, where you cannot change laws retrospectively and expect courts to validate, that change in the laws. The courts have said quite categorically that those laws under which the investment was made have got to be maintained, particularly for that particular investment. So I do believe it will impact on us initially, but I do believe that we will ultimately succeed if the matter gets litigated, which it will have to, because with the kind of investment that we've made, we can't just sit back. And in our case, particularly, it's a public company. We have 22,000 shareholders who have invested money into this company, and they have a right to benefit from that investment, and that right will be taken away if they delete that Section 10A2B, and they would expect the company to fight it to the bitter end, which is what we'll have to do.
Let's look at some of the financial tools. Working overseas, I have spent most of my career working, exploring overseas destinations. So the financial tools that are available to exploration companies are something like transfer of leases, joint ventures, royalty sales, sale of shares, essentially sale of shares, a partial change in ownership. As soon as you sell a share to me, I become a part owner of your company. Forward selling. These are pretty usual fundraising tools available to juniors all over the world. Are these available to Indian investors at the moment?
Unfortunately, no, not to the extent that they are available overseas. Yes, there are. As a listed company, of course, you can go out and do capital raisings, but those capital raisings are very strictly monitored. That you have to adhere to certain guidelines. You can only do capital raisings, providing you have projected cash flows that you can demonstrate, providing you have a project that is going to go into production. But you can't do some of the kind of fundraisings that you can overseas without the capacity to go into mining, which is not required overseas, but it is more or less required in India. Other bits and pieces that you mentioned, joint ventures, transferability of leases, sale of projects are not available in India under the current mining regulations. And they are a little bit of an inhibiting factor to the growth of the industry, and it shows. If you look at India in 1987 and you look at gold production in 1987 versus gold production in countries like China at that same time or the rest of the world, and you look at how well those countries have progressed vis-a-vis India, Australia, China, Russia, US, UK, hundreds of countries you can quote, African continent. Why is that the case? Why? Potentially, the geological terrain in India is almost identical to some of the countries where they've made some big discoveries overseas. Today, China is producing something like 400 tons of gold. In 1987, India and China were producing about 17 tons of gold. Together, India has now dropped that 17 tons to 2 tons. China has moved from 17 tons to 400 tons. You see the gap building up. Why? And yet we are importing 900 tons of gold. Where's the logic? Why can't the government authorities sit down, look at this seriously and say, here, we have a serious problem, encourage the junior explorers, companies like ours and many, many overseas companies that are wanting to come to India, bring in the foreign direct investment, fix the laws, more importantly, fix the implementation of those laws and see what this country can do. Tremendous potential, but it's not happening. It can happen. Somebody at the top needs to take a decision.
Why do you think the government authorities are hesitant in providing these financial tools to the industry?
Well, I battle to find a reason, because to me there is no logical reason for that not to happen, other than perhaps they are not well versed to the extent that they should be, and they do not have they have not devoted the time and the resources to understand properly what is happening internationally and why those countries have such a big booming gold industry, and other mineral producing industries, whereas India does not match up, particularly in the precious metal sector. India does not match up. They should spend time, they should talk more to people in the industry and not rely purely on, if I could use the word, bureaucrats who are not sufficiently equipped with the kind of background that is required to have a thorough understanding of this industry and therefore create progression in terms of laws, in terms of doability, in terms of production. It's not happening because they're not talking to the right people and they're not devoting enough resources to understand those problems.
So, but we see, I have been attending PDAC in Indaba for last so many years, and every year I see a Indian government contingent there, consisting of secretaries and joint secretaries and additional secretaries and senior management from public sector undertakings who go to these conferences. So they would have probably understood how the international exploration system works. Why is it that it's not happening?
Very, very valid point. I do accept that. Yeah, those that are attending those international conferences, are privileged in the sense that they need to come back and implement some of those policies and some of those regulations and some of those mechanisms that are being adopted overseas, that they have now been made privy to and implement them in India in terms of decision making, in terms of new regulations. But somehow it hasn't happened. And why, I think, Amit, you need to talk to them as to why that has not happened. Because to me, it makes no logical sense, as I said earlier, as to why those laws are not getting implemented. It should happen.
So that will be another markdown to another mystery of how our government functions. So,
Absolutely. You can mark it down to another mystery, yes.
uh,
They should do it, but it's not happening.
okay. And so now, see, the financial tools are not available to our industry. That should be. The protection of investment and protection of tenure is also on shaky grounds. So, what signals are we giving to the global industry watchers and potential investors? I mean, those tools are available to them elsewhere. So,
Yes.
what signals are we giving to them, and what would you advise to the policymakers?
Well, my advice to the policymakers is, what you say, you please implement. What you say is you want additional foreign direct investment into the mining sector, as an example. Implement the tools for that to happen. What is actually happening is you say that you want the foreign direct investment into this sector, yet when the investors come in, they are shaken up, they are trudged upon, they are trampled upon, quite honestly, and they run away. There are many junior explorers that have come into this country over the last few years, made some minor investments, and simply run away because they're saying that this whole regulatory environment is not investment friendly, it is not tenable. We are not prepared to devote any more than the number of years that they've spent here trying to work out how the system works and progress. You're not prepared to make any further investment. They're running away. So you're not getting what you want. It's very simple to do that. Talk to the people in the industry who are directly affected by what you say. People like us, and there are many other companies like us. I could give you a list of half a dozen companies, a dozen companies that are directly impacted. As a matter of fact, this Section 10A2B deletion could impact something like 600 odd cases within India. Now, all of those companies will say exactly the same thing. You want grow, you want to create jobs, particularly in the rural economies, you want your GDP in the right direction, you want your current account deficit in the right direction, you want mineral wealth to generate good things for the country. Simply bring in the laws and, more importantly, implement those laws in the right fashion so that it can happen. Don't simply say that you want to do this and nothing happens at the ground level. That is the problem. And nothing happens at the ground level is because they are not talking to all the right people. And bear in mind, there are junior explorers, there are mid-level explorers, and there are the senior mining companies. Senior mining companies' perspective might be very different to what the junior explorers want. And majority of the gold discoveries anywhere in the world are made by the junior explorers. They are the ones who go out in the field and toil and raise money and make the investment and do the risky bit, make the discovery, and then if the discovery is not given to them and snatched away by an auction by one of the larger mining companies, that is totally unfair and unjust. Nobody is going to come in and make investments on that basis.
You remind me, your statements or your thoughts remind me of a book that I read. It says India grows at night when the government sleeps. So, unfortunately, in the mining sector, government has been probably too awake.
Now it's I am saying that there is enough talent in the mining industry. There is enough talent within the bureaucracy. There is enough talent within the government machinery. All what you need to do, that talent needs to do, is sit down, talk to the right people, address the issues, and let's get a move on. And one formula does not fit all. There are deep-seated minerals, there are minerals on the surface, there are minerals that are easily extractable, there are minerals that take years for exploration. Don't come up with a single policy that impacts on the whole lot. It will never ever work. You need to understand the different streams within the mining industry, and you need to bring in laws and implement those laws applicable to those particular streams. Then have a look, and you'll see the immediate impact of the changes that you make. There are many, many, many prospects ready to go into production, but for the regulatory environment. Our Ganaju deposit can go into production. It was originally planned to go into production in 2017. Then it became 2019. Now it's 2020, and we are still waiting for the license approval. The day we get the approval, we have investors ready. We have the capabilities, the technical capabilities, everything else. The feasibility study has been done. Everything has been done. The blueprint is ready to go into production. We will be producing 300,000 tons of gold over a period of time. And as we produce gold, we will be undertaking greater exploration. That 300,000 could become 500,000. The 500,000 could become a million ounces. You multiply a million ounces by the quantum of, by the price of gold today, by the job creation, by the taxes that we pay, by the royalty we pay, by the improvement in the areas that we are working in, and look at the benefit. That you got to compare with. If you don't do this, it's going to be litigated against. The whole thing is going to get stuck, and for years there is going to be no development. Think about it. Is all I say, and it's
And
not difficult to come to the right conclusion.
well, many countries have done that. Many jurisdictions, you see, Western Australia
Correct.
or
Correct.
Ontario,
Correct.
British Columbia, and
Many countries have done that, and that's why they progress.
all these Chile, I mean, all these jurisdictions, all the laws and regulations are available on the internet. You don't actually have to physically go there to study them. So why do we insist on keep reinventing the wheel?
Absolutely, I told you. To me, it is completely illogical. It makes absolutely no sense. And the only thing that I can put it down to, either they don't have the commitment to do it, or they're not spending the kind of resources that they need to understand the situation, and they're not. And if they're not understanding the situation, it's possibly because they're not talking to the right people, and the right people might be different categories of right people. One person is not right for all. I am not right for the larger mining houses. I am right for the junior explorers. I am saying for the junior explorers, the laws need to be uh, implemented in a certain, designed and implemented in a certain fashion. For another industry, that is, let's say, the iron ore industry, the laws need to be implemented or designed in a certain fashion. Make that distinction and see how things progress.
Excellent, Sandeep. Thanks for such a passionate talk, and
No,
coming
that's
out, coming
wonderful.
with your heart out of the issues. I know. It's like you have spent so much time doing that and
Correct.
really do these things.
Yeah.
And I hope this these ideas reach the decision makers and they make the right policy choices to see this new kind of industry growing in India. Okay, thank you so much.
Fine, Amit. I hope so too.
Friends, that was Mr. Sandeep Lakhwara, CEO of the Deccan Gold Mines Limited. Such a passion about his work. But there are some very serious takeaways from this discussion. We have billions of dollars of worth of gold sitting in the ground in small villages in mountains of the country. Some of these have already been proven by private companies, but mining licenses and other possible associated permissions are taking over 14 years to get through. And in this case, it has not been granted even after 14 years. All along, government officers keep changing the interpretation and implementation of the law. Now, mineral exploration and mining are long-term investments. These are projects of the scale of 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. Foreign investors are typically very apprehensive of frequent changes in the rules, inconsistent implementation, inconsistent interpretation of the rules by different government officials, and worst of all, possible retrospective changes in the laws. As Mr. Lakhwara just gave one example, in a small village in Ganajur in Karnataka, we have over $500 million of already proven gold resources waiting to be exploited for last 16 years. And all the while, we are consistently importing more than 30 to 40 billion dollars of gold every year. And just think, this is just one company working in just one area. How many more such deposits do we have? Undiscovered, just because the people who are capable and willing to do these discoveries are staying away. Now we are talking about a period of a very long period, 10 to 15 years. So it's not just one party or the other party. All through the changes in the ruling dispensation in center and in states, inconsistencies have remained. The government bodies are tying up the industry in the red tape. Will comptroller and auditor general ever start auditing the cost of the indecision and equivalent notional loss of tax and royalty revenues, loss of foreign exchange, loss of jobs, and above all, loss of country's reputation in the investor circles? Now, global exploration industry is very small and tightly knit circle. Everybody knows everybody else. Seeing the plight of the brave ones who pioneered FDI in mineral exploration in India, it would take some serious work by the government to get anyone back. And this would be despite the excellent geological potential. And this is after these inconsistencies and irregular interpretation of the laws are removed. Now, several countries have made mineral exploration and mining a hallmark of their success and a major part of their economies. And some of these are advanced economies, Australia and Canada. While in India, during the same period, the mining sector contribution to the GDP has been consistently declining. As an example, like Sandeep said, in 1987, India and China both were producing about 17 tons of gold each. And today, China has grown to 300 to 400 tons per year production, and Indian production has declined. Probably the figures would probably just be 2 to 3 tons. That's a very sorry state of affair. The last 5-6 years, the government has made a decision of allocating mineral resources through auctions and getting obscenely high auctioning prices. Is it fair of the government to squeeze a declining industry even tighter for revenues through auctioning? Should the government respond by nationalizing exploration? Now, this would have an unintended consequence of investing public funds into a high-risk business activity. Are our people who would be in charge of this investment, are they trained for taking right decisions in high-risk conditions? Most of our government officers are typically risk averse and would not take decisions if there's a risk of failure. Now, these are the industries, these are high risk industries. Would they be willing and able to take the decision, or would all the decision making just freeze up? And also, why would government want to get into a high risk business when the private companies and private enterprises are there and willing and able to succeed in such high risk environment? It takes a very special mindset to be able to do that. So these are points to ponder. I hope the policy circles and decision makers take cognizance of what the industry is saying and take the right decisions and help this industry that has so much potential. Thank you.